Let's explore factoring a quadratic polynomial. Specifically, let's look at one in this shape. What general shape is this polynomial in? It's in the shape ax squared plus bx plus c, where a is not 1. Let's factor it. Let's try to factor it. It may or may not factor. Generally, when factoring any polynomial, you should see what the GCF is. What is the greatest factor that divides all terms? Here the GCF is, each term is divisible by 2. And that turns out actually to be the greatest common factor. There's nothing larger than 2 that divides all 3 terms at the same time. Let's factor the GCF out. When you pull out 2, what remains is you have to divide each term by 2. 3x squared here, minus 14x, minus 5. So what's left to do is to see if this polynomial, this trinomial, in the parentheses factors. And we should ask ourselves, does any special formula apply to the shape of this? Or does any special formula apply to this polynomial? Is it a difference of cubes, a difference of squares, a sum of cubes, etc.? That's the question we ask ourselves. And the answer turns out to be no. It's a 5 at the end here. So what can we use at this point to see whether it factors? For a polynomial in this shape, this general shape, where a is not equal to 1, we can use one of 2 methods to try to factor it. First, trial and error, sometimes called guess and check. Another method available is grouping. Let's go through this method right here and see if we're successful. Again, this polynomial may or may not factor. We're trying to factor 3x squared minus 14x minus 5. Let's review grouping. To factor something in the general shape ax squared plus bx plus c, where a is not equal to 1, we want to find 2 numbers. Let me use, for my numbers, let me use them, let me call them alpha and beta. We want to see if we can find 2 numbers, alpha and beta, such that the following 2 things happen at the same time. Their product, alpha times beta, needs to equal, see, a is not 1 here, so this is where a comes into play. It needs to equal a times c, which in our problem is 3 times minus 5 equals minus 15. And we need the sum of our two numbers to equal the middle term, the middle coefficient, b, which in our polynomial is minus 14. Now there are lots of numbers whose product is minus 15. Lots of pairs of numbers whose product is minus 15. We want to see if there's a pair whose sum is minus 14. It turns out that there is a pair. 1 and minus 15. The product and sum are what we need them to be. Now, how do we use these two numbers? So here's our trinomial, the one we're trying to factor, to finish the problem. Let me circle this middle term. What we just found was that for our two numbers, 1 and minus 15, they add up to this middle coefficient, minus 14. So we can replace this circle term with the following. Minus 14x equals x minus 15x. So these two polynomials are equal. So now we've taken our 3-term polynomial, our trinomial, and written it as a 4-term polynomial. And now we can group. We can literally group the terms together. Let's group them into two groups of 2 terms. Let's go with the first 2 terms as one group, the second 2 terms as the other group. This first group, it's a binomial. What is the GCF? The GCF turns out to be x. What remains is 3x plus 1. The GCF of the second group, of this binomial over here, is minus 5, and what's left is 3x plus 1. And you see that we now have a difference of 2 terms, the 2 terms I've circled, and that each of these 2 terms, each of these 2 circled terms, has a factor of 3x plus 1 in common. So we can pull that common factor out, and what remains is x minus 5 in parentheses. Parentheses, x minus 5. And we now have shown that the trinomial we're trying to factor, it does factor. It factors as 3x plus 1 times x minus 5. Okay, let's stop and think about our final answer to this problem. We don't want to forget, we'll put our final answer in this box. We were trying to factor (6x squared minus 28x minus 10). Remember, there's the GCF of 2 that we pulled out. Don't forget to include that in your final answer. Your final answer, of course, is 3x plus 1 times x minus 5, along with the 2 in front of that. That is your final answer.